In October 2001, Ottakers, which was a bookshop in Castle Quay Shopping Centre in Banbury, ran a short story writing competition on various subjects about local history. I chose to write about my first job. My story was accepted for inclusion in a book they intended publishing. It appeared with the title The Office Boy and won one of the 3 first prizes of £250. Here it is. The Office Boy. I started my first job at the age of 15 in 1949. I was a pupil at Dashwood Road School, and shortly before I left I was called into the headmaster's office, where Mr. Proctor told me that a firm of solicitors, Messrs. Stockton, Sons and Fortescue of 38 High Street, Banbury, were looking for an office boy, and that he had arranged an interview for me. I duly attended and was shown up 3 or 4 flights of stairs to a small attic room, where I was interviewed by 2 ladies, one of whom told me that the honorarium would be 12 shillings and 6pence per week. That's 62.5 pence. Note that Kelly's Directory of Banbury cost 7 and 6pence, which was 37.5 pence. For that princely sum I would have to arrive at work at 8:30 in the morning, light the fires, dust some of the desks, bring in and sort the incoming mail and look after the outgoing mail. Finishing time in the evening was 5:30, provided that I was not needed to take any late mail to the post office on the opposite side of the High Street. I was aghast at this for a full week's work, because at the time I was working as a paper boy for Bill Gilks, the newsagent at the top of Parsons Street, who gave me 15 bob a week, 15 shillings was 75 pence, for delivering his Warwick Road round, which started at the old police station and finished at the barley mow, and only took a couple of hours in the morning. However, I deluded myself that this was for a trial period and accepted. When I started a few weeks later, I felt as though I were entering a time machine. I was shown to a high desk with a climb-up stool, which looked like a relic from an old Victorian counting house. There was a 6-inch high black wooden balustrade surrounding the back half, and leaning up against it was a small black rectangular wooden plaque with these words in gold lettering: "Work hard for 9 hours a day and don't worry. Then one day you may become a boss and work for 18 hours a day and have all the worry." On the wall facing me was a portrait of an old Victorian gentleman holding a top hat. I was told that this was a Mr. Munton, from the time 100 years earlier when the firm was called Munton and Stockton. This was probably William Munton. See Victorian Banbury by Barry Trinder, page 27. Standing on the mantelpiece below the portrait were a hand grenade and an artillery shell from the First World War. At my left elbow was an early plug-type telephone exchange with eyelids which closed when someone was ringing the switchboard. I was told that I would be shown how to use it, but first I had to be introduced to the other members of the firm. The form was to refer to all people as Mr., Mrs. or Miss, followed sometimes by their Christian name and sometimes by their surname. So there were Mr. Claude Fortescue, Mr. Arthur Stockton, Miss Ensor, and a few weeks later, after I started there, Mr. Huntress. The gentlemen partners were always addressed as Sir, and Miss Ensor as Miss. The other senior members of staff were all always addressed as Mr. Lowe, Mr. Ward, etc. The whole atmosphere of the place was of another age, and the people were generally very polite to one another, like in the television series Upstairs and Downstairs. Mr. Ward, however, was of a somewhat brusquer nature. He never referred to me as Alan. To him I was always boy. Introductions over, I was sent for by Mr. Lowe, the bookkeeper. He gave me 15 shillings, that's 75 pence, and a small notebook, and told me that I was to buy stamps for the firm's postage out of the 15 shillings, and to record it very carefully in the notebook. In those days the office boy delivered the local mail. A first-class stamp was only twopence halfpenny. Mr. Lowe was very particular about his ledger. Before making an entry, he would select a pen and try the entry on a piece of scrap paper. £15, 14 shillings and 11 3 farthings. We still used farthings then. When he was satisfied that the pen worked properly, he would approach the tall lectern upon which rested the revered volume, make the entry above his round ebony ruler, and blot it with a semicircular blotting paper roller. In later years, when I was a draftsman, I saw some superb pen work, but nothing that impressed me as much as the beautiful uniformity of Mr. Lowe's ledger. On my first morning, an older boy took me on the daily round to deliver letters by hand to clients and other solicitors in the town. We went down the High Street, first to number 35, where old Mr. Lamley Fisher practised on his own, then over the road to Applin, Hunt and Thomas, next to the old post office, and back across the road to White Horns and Haynes, who were near S.H. Jones, the wine merchants, and finally down to the offices of Fairfax Barfield at 29 Bridge Street, next to the Catherine Wheel pub near the town hall. Their office boy was Mr. Alan Olds, who recently retired from Applin's in West Bar. There was one office above the street door which was kept locked, and no one was allowed to enter, because the occupant had gone off to the war and never come back. As the year was 1949, I naturally assumed that this meant the 1939-45 war. But no, it was the First World War. By 9 the post would arrive and had to be sorted and taken to the people to whom it was addressed. Mr. Arthur would allow me to unpack any consignment of books, which meant that I was able to admire the beautiful leather-bound books with the gold lettering and take the packaging away when I left the room. Then followed the daily delivery described above. By about 10:30 I was free to do any other jobs required. One of the partners had a daughter who was an excellent pastry cook, and occasionally gave him some cakes to take to the office. On these occasions, when he had overeaten at lunchtime, he was so unwilling to hurt her feelings by not eating them, that he would ask the office boy to act as his taster, eat the cakes and give him a report on them. This was the office boy's perks. Not a word to anyone, mind. I liked working for Mr. Ward. The best way I can think of describing Mr. Septimus Ernest Ward was as Banbury's equivalent of Rumpole of the Bailey. His title was the Clerk to the Justice's Clerk, and he gave me the impression of knowing everything about and everybody in Banbury. He had an old manually operated typewriter which he hammered unmercifully with a whir of podgy fingers, but he also had a talent for calligraphy when an old document needed something adding to it. Once he sent me up into the space under the eaves to find a bundle of old papers and bring them to him. I understand that when the firm closed, many of these papers were taken to Woodstock because I saw some of them many years later in the archives at Oxford. He found the document he wanted, which may have been on parchment or vellum which wouldn't go into the typewriter, studied it carefully and told me to mix some black powdered ink to his instructions. Then he selected a pen and practised on a piece of scrap paper for a while, similar to Mr. Lowe, and when he was able to produce a script like the original, he engrossed the document slowly and carefully. A sprinkle of powder and the job was done. All apprentices and lads are familiar with being sent by the older men to the stores for a long stand or striped paint. I think Stockton's equivalent was the collection of the fief farm rents. One day I was given a list in a notebook and told to go and collect them. They were strange peppercorn rents from some of the oldest buildings in the town. There were amounts like 2 shillings and 6pence, that's 12.5 pence from the Waitley Hall Hotel. 1 shilling, that's 10pence from the Woolpack, and 10pence, that's 4pence from the Unicorn in the marketplace. When I returned to the office, having collected about 90% of the rents, I was greeted with incredulity. No one had ever succeeded in collecting nearly all the fief farm rents in one trip. As I wrote at the beginning, my finishing time in the evening was supposed to be 5:30, which gave me an hour to cross the horse fair and the People's Park to my home at 22 Bath Road at the bottom of King's Road, have a quick snack, and get to my typing classes at the place between the District Bank and the White Lion by 6:30. Unfortunately, one of the partners regularly left the office at 11 to start his lunch hour, returned to the office around 3:30 or 4, and then started dictating to his secretary. I was supposed to hang on to take his letters to the post office. Many times I didn't get home until 6:30, which made it a 10-hour day, as I had started at 8:30 in the morning. I was only 15, but I saw no reason to let myself be taken for a mug and work a 10-hour day for 12 and a tanner. I stuck the job out from July to the following spring, when one day during my morning round I saw a small notice in the window of the Midlands Electricity Board. Junior clerk wanted. I applied and was set on at over £2 a week, although I had to work Saturday mornings, and so I started my second job. Epilogue. About 50 years later I had to call into Applin's of West Bar on business, and there on the wall in the hall was the brass plate from outside the front door of Stockton, Sons and Fortescue. Many times I have wondered what course my life would have taken had I remained with them, and what became of my Dickensian desk with its encouraging plaque and the black rod of Middleton Cheney.